Okay, go ahead, darling.
Thank you, Yawa, that we can gather here tonight. For me, it's tonight, but we are here. We are here joined in your name, joined to learn more about all this deepness of your word. And I pray tonight in this hour while we're here that you please bless Eric and every one of us. To hear the words that you are saying, to listen. Sorry, please edit this. Thank you, Yahweh, for keeping us safe. Thank you. Bless this meeting.
Amen. So here we are, it's March 9th of 2025, date stamp. So I've kind of projected looking forward that we're going to be talking about Psalm 119. So that's what this is. So on the label that is on the little, you call a thumbnail picture, it says QOOF-YOD-TET. So that's the Hebrew way of writing 119. Kuf is 100, then 10 is the Yod, and 9 is the Tet. So 119. It's the longest chapter in the entire Bible. So I started mentioning something about 119 a few months ago, and I started talking about the structure of what's in Aleph, maybe in Bet, I believe it was, and then I stopped and I went into a couple other series, you might say. One was Gabor Liyawa, I think also Suffering ALEF-TAV, and Object of Affection. And the reason for that is that it depends on the frame of mind you have for reading Psalm 119 for what you'll see that it says. And one thing I've noticed in my own experience and in talking to other people is that you'll see in Scripture what you are prepared to see. If somebody tells you that there's let's call it a doctrinal presupposition, okay, you've already assumed or supposed that this is the doctrine, and then you look at numerous different Bible verses and you'll find that it lines up with the doctrine. But if you change your doctrine and you look at those same Bible verses, you'll see that it says something different. Why does it work that way? That's in the English. Well, it's also true of looking in the Hebrew, in that if you're looking at a word, you can see different stuff in there. And what I've found is that the more, you might say, techniques that you have for analyzing a word, you'll see different things. So back in 2011, I went through this Psalm 119 and I actually presented it. I forget which day it was, but it was one of the times during the middle of the eriktology class. And I discussed this and read it. And even though per se, in particular, Psalm 119 had nothing to do with that particular letter. Why I did that is that getting halfway through the ALEF-BEIT course, where you're starting to see things a certain way, I presented Psalm 119 as something you could read in this alternative method that you'd never see before if you hadn't gotten up to speed, you might say, with understanding the meanings of those letters. So there's different ways to read Psalm 119. One way is to just read the words, in which case you could pick any random verse. Here, I'll just open up to some random page in 119 here. I practice justice and righteousness. Abandon me not to those who exploit me. Okay, you could say, well, why did David say that? And that happens to be verse 121 in the ayin section, the first line of the ayin section. I practiced justice and righteousness. Don't abandon me to those who exploit me. What's that got to do with the letter ayin? Well, if I look back at the eriktology study, there's a scales of balance associated with the ayin. And there's the beatitude that lines up with blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And there's this concept with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. So there's this idea about the ayin that mishpat, memshin pei tet, it's translated justice, it's translated right ruling, ordinance sometimes, but it's shofet is the word for judge, mishpat, well, shofetim is judges, mishpat then is what judges do, or the fact that the one who is making rulings of justice, that would be put the mem prefix in front of shofet. So it'd say, I practiced justice and righteousness. Therefore, if the way the kingdom of heaven works is that Yahuwah always, it says his throne, I think it's in Proverbs, his throne is founded on justice and righteousness, mishpat and zadika. And for the verse 121 here to say, I practiced, well, that's ayin shin yod tav yod. So ayin shin hey is the word that means to make or to do, to press, to squeeze, produce, accomplish, force, compel, just make this thing happen. So it's not necessarily the word practice. In fact, ayin shin nun is the word for smoking, where you're at a, say you're a blacksmith and you've got the fire cranked up, or you're welding, or you're working and it's like, wow, he's really smoking. I mean, it could be taken literally smoke or just really being productive. The yod tav yod, my work I have been doing, tav yod is to be doing or have done or will do, mishpat and zadika. So don't abandon me to those who exploit me. See, if David had in mind what goes around comes around, some people might call it karma or sowing and reaping, as you sow, so shall you reap. That is you might say, a concrete rule, or that's just the way it works in the kingdom. Now you can say, well, what if you're not in the kingdom? So somebody's trying to exploit David. He had quite a few enemies, apparently. But he has this understanding that says, see the word ayin, ayin spelled ayin yod nun, look it up in Klein's dictionary. It means to look at, to consider, to deliberate, to really wrap your mind around it, weigh carefully, balance exactly, measure deliberately. It's really putting your attention to something. And what you put your attention to is the way this universe works, which is whatever you do bears fruit with a seed in it, and it's going to propagate of its own kind, hence the idea of the fruit. You better look well, hence the idea of the eyeball. So ayin is drawn as a circle with a dot in it. And whatever you do is going to come back. And he says, listen, I'm doing mishpat and zadika. I'm doing justice and righteousness. So that's what's supposed to come back. Well, that's what's supposed to come back. It is what's going to come back. But why would he say, don't abandon me to those who exploit me? See, there's more to it than David saying to Elohim, oh, don't abandon me. He's talking to himself in the sense of he's saying, I will not be abandoned. So in spite of what things look like, gee, I've got some enemy. I've got some, let's call it some illness or some disturbance, some frustrating circumstances, some agitations of neighbors or legal stuff, the government, whatever it might be, finances, and you say, hey, listen, I practice Mishpat and Zadika. I do Mishpat and Zadika. Therefore, Mishpat and Zadika should follow me and surround me, and I'm in the middle of that, and that's my reality. So he's almost speaking, what do they call it, affirmations by saying this, but it's written as if he's like pleading, oh, don't abandon me, like he might be. It's like, hey, come on, I did something. I shouldn't be having this experience. So understanding that the ways of the kingdom are just the ways the universe is built. And Elohim, Yahuwah Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, the one and only Elohim, ensures that that's the way it works because his throne is built on, established on that. And the fact that he has dominion at all means that stuff has to happen. Now, if there was some question and somebody says, oh, well, I remember seeing, it was a good illustration on the internet, Jesus and the devil are sitting there arm wrestling, and, you know, the devil might get him down. It's like, no, there's no chance of anybody. What consciousness do we have? So the point is, understanding these 22 letters builds a consciousness. The way you understand the 22 letters colors what you see, are the lenses by which you're looking to see. When I say that, if you have binoculars, you can see in the distance. You can regulate where the focus is by turning the binoculars. But what if you have night vision goggles on? Or what if you have X-ray vision? Or what if you have infrared or ultraviolet, or you see different wavelengths that you can't see with your normal eye? So too, if you put on different, call them goggles, different sorts of lenses, you'll see what's going on in the world, in life, in the universe differently. So there's this, we mentioned before, there's this humorous, it was a film called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I believe it was. And there's a scene where someday in the future, there's this incredible computer, and somebody asked it a question, and the computer's been churning to find the answer for, I don't know, a few hundred years or something, a long time. And this is the day that the computer finally has an answer. And so everybody is gathered, and they have some person like a priest or a governor or a king or somebody standing up and, okay, you great computer, give us the answer. This is the question, what's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? What's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? It's like, it's such a profound but almost a stupid question, but it's a question that nobody knows how to answer. What's the real meaning of, purpose of? What's the aim? What's the mission for why is this planet here? Why does the universe even exist? We talked a year or two ago about Jim Holt's book, Why Does the World Exist? And he was going around talking to various philosophers and physicists and researching what they had said and putting the two together. And I thought it was a wonderful read. I thought it was great. And he said, we're not going to look at the religious matter. We're not going to say God made it that way. It's like reason, logic, science, philosophy, which is not exactly like science, but they're looking at what exists and saying, what does this mean? So to say, what's the meaning of life? Why is there even life happening? And some people will argue, well, it's not really happening. This is all just a program, like the Matrix being run some other sort of, so, you know, people have all kinds of ideas. But the fact is, we're here, we're thinking, like Descartes, Rene Descartes. I think, therefore I am. I exist. I know I exist because I'm thinking. Everything else might be an illusion, but I'm thinking. So I exist. But why? What put me here? I don't know where I came from. I don't know where I'm going, but here I am. I exist present tense. Now, what's the functional purpose? Are we all just, let's assume bugs don't have eternal life. Maybe dogs and cats do if somebody loves them. In fact, there's a theory that say if you love something, if you love an animal, that animal gets to be in eternity with the humans wherever they go. And it's like, is that true? Doesn't matter whether it's true, it's just an idea. So random animals who aren't loved, they're just random animals who fill in the ecosystem. Well, they die and they turn to dust and disappear, and their consciousness, they don't have a spirit, a soul, they just live and die. It could be that that's what happens to people. Could be. And it could be that every near-death experience is a fake, is a scam, is some other sort of chemical hallucination, even though you see your body and you float up and it's like, yeah, it's all imagination. I've heard people say that. So nobody really knows for sure. Some people say, I absolutely know because I've had these experiences. I know people that have been up in the heavens. I've never been, but they've looked back on the earth. They see things and they meet people who have lived before. And how do you make sense out of anything? Depending on which denomination you go to or which religion you're born into, you'll have a whole different perspective on why do I exist? Why does the world exist? Why does the universe exist? How did it get here? Why was it made? And then when you see other people of other cultures and religions have very real experiences, and you look at artifacts, they've uncovered some incredible stuff that's built on the face of the earth. There's something they call a temple. There's one in India, there's Indonesia. There's numerous ones, but in particular, there's a couple things that they say. There's one, I've seen this picture a few times. It's you might say in the ground, and they say that, well, it was carved out by a bunch of workmen a couple thousand years ago, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, from one solid piece of, I think it was basalt. Really intricate, all these carvings. The thing is just, if you had to carve one little piece, it would take you years. But they apparently started at the top and carved all this. It's so intricate, so detailed. And they call it a temple, but yet there's no place to go in. And that's not apparently what it is. It actually looks like some sort of cymatic geometrical printing. It's almost like if you had a 3D printer that could drive some kind of a router with bits that could carve into stone. And if you could control this thing with the ultimate high-tech equipment and carve this thing with this 3D router, maybe you could make something like this. But it almost looks like it's inhuman. It's not possible. No, you can't make something like this, but yet here it is. And there's some, what they call temples. Well, some people suggest that these things are not temple for worship religiously, but they're things that are built as a shrine to some foreign deity, or are they physics? Is this like some sort of, let's call it a resonator, some sort of capacitor? It catches energy and it dissipates energy. Can you aim it? And it's like, we don't even know what the thing is for. But what I'm saying is, you see something like that exists on the other side of the planet somewhere, and it's like, well, that looks pretty profound, and it does exist. So how do we know that? What if it contradicts what this scripture is saying? This is all speculation. What's it saying? And that stuff, those carvings of what looks like scientific, religious structures exist. So somebody else had knowledge that we don't even have presently. And so some people suggest that, well, those things are made by space aliens, or make up some random number. Millions of years ago, there was a race of people that lived on the planet Earth that had technologies that we can't even imagine. That must be what it is, because we can't wrap our mind around it. So what do you do? So the reason for the Mishkan pattern, in light of that kind of predicament of observation and the quandary of going, I don't know. How do I know I can trust Judeo-Christian paradigm compared to just the big categories, Hindu, Islam, Buddhist, Jewish, Christian, and whoever else? I mean, what makes me think this is any better? I was raised. And it's like, yeah, that doesn't mean it's right. I have faith. That doesn't mean it's right. I know somebody who went up into the heavens. That doesn't mean it's right. How do you know this is right? So the incredible thing about the Mishkan pattern is that if you go back to Genesis 1, okay, that's where the Bible starts, but where does anything else start? Well, that starts with creation. And that's where the one who later identifies himself as YHUH Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, he told Moshe to write all these words down. And so what we have is, okay, Moshe, he is the guy, went up to Mount Sinai, and whether or not the information already existed, and it was handed down throughout the generations, ever since the days of Adam, handing it to Seth, who handed it eventually to Noah, carried it on the ark, and gave us the information. Maybe these stories were already told. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Noah would tell his 3 sons that, bedtime stories, when they were little kids. Did he? Or did Moshe write that? Well, nobody knows. So it's, again, you can believe whatever you want. But at least going back to the beginning and saying, that's where Moshe started writing. And if he was told, write all the words of Elohim, he's told that in, it was 7 chapters before we're told that the finger of Elohim wrote. Exodus 20 is where the 10 Commandments are spoken. It says Elohim's finger wrote later, but 7 chapters before that, Moshe was told to write. So Moshe had writing, but we don't have any record of anybody writing. So it might have been verbally handed down. But if you say, well, the first writing is of the creation event, and it's like, if you ever stop to think, why did he do it in 7 days? He could have done it all at once. He could have taken 10 days, or he could have taken 100 days. Why? Or 40 days. Pick up some great number that's supposed to be the great heavenly number. Why 7? So people say, oh, 7 is the heavenly number, spiritual number. Why? What makes it a spiritual number? Well, there's a bunch of things that are 7. There's a bunch of things in the Bible that are 7, so 7 must be the spiritual number, the heavenly number. See, there's no way to know exactly why at all. But if you look at it in Hebrew, the word 7 is shin bet ayin, and that means to swear a vow. It means to fulfill the vow that you swore. And if you don't fully fulfill the vow, you get cursed. You make an oath, and the thing about an oath, I promise, I vow, I swear, whatever. It's just a word. I raise my hand, put my hand on some book, and it's like, so what? Those are all just gestures of people's beliefs and phooey nonsense. Oh no, there's a built-in reality to the universe, and the reality of the universe is, if you make a vow, you better fulfill the vow. And if you do fulfill the vow, there's some kind of blessing. And if you don't fulfill the vow, there's a very specific curse because you broke your vow. It's like if you tell a lie in court, do you promise to tell the whole truth? Yeah, sure, whatever. And then you lie in court, and it's like, that's perjury. That's against the law. Yeah, shut up. I'm already a criminal. And it's like, no. There's something about breaking a vow or not telling the truth when you've sworn to tell the truth in court. In my understanding, it used to be that people believed that there really is this spiritual dynamic of blessing and cursing. And if you break your vow, you've just called in all these invisible forces, let's call them demons and angels and whatever, to just harass the bejeebers out of you for the rest of your life until you repent or until you admit that you're a scoundrel, some kind of scallywag who I lied after I gave my word that I wouldn't. Oh, get these guys off me. So people used to believe in that kind of thing. And if we go, bunch of idiots, we don't believe in that stuff. So people lie when they're giving congressional testimony or something. Because everybody thinks this stuff is nonsense. Well, if I go back to Genesis 1 and say there was 7 days, and now let me assume that there's a reason. So if I'm going to first have to say, I'm going to assume the Bible's telling me the truth, though I have no proof. It might have just been Moses, and they say, well, Moses wrote the Torah, but there's evidence by style or whatever. There's 5 different people wrote bits of the Torah, not just Moses. It's like, that's something for scholars to wrangle about. But if I can say, what if the Bible really is true? Okay, well, he built the world in 7 days, so what? That's in Genesis. So if you run up to Exodus, where they're being told how to make the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and in approximately chapter 25, he says, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. And they're talking about a big white fence and a barbecue grill and a wash basin, and then there's a tent covered area, and inside there's the menorah, the table of showbread, altar of incense, there's a veil, and then in the Holy of Holies, the Kadosh Kodashim, there's this Ark of the Covenant thing. Okay, and it's like, now there's all kinds of people that have written about and talked about how that's a prophetic statement, that's the way a human being is, body, spirit is designed, that has something to do with the Messiah, that has something to do with prophecy, that has something to do with the kingdom of heaven, and it's like, what? People get all kinds of ideas, doesn't make it true. And then in Leviticus 23, you get 7 festivals, well, plus the Sabbath. It starts with the Sabbath day, and then it gives you a list of 7 festivals. It's like, so what? These are just Jewish holidays. No, that's what we're told. Now, the thing about the Mishkan pattern is that I noticed, just all of a sudden, I noticed one day back in 2004, that the pattern of the 7 days thematically was exactly the same as the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was exactly the same as this list of 7 Moedim, festivals of Leviticus 23. And it also fit exactly with the Beatitudes of Matthew 5. And then I thought, well, that's 4 places. There must be at least 7 where the pattern holds. So I started looking through the scripture to try to find, where's there 3 more I can look at? Well, there's Daniel chapter 9. It says 77s have been 77s. It actually says 7s, 7 in plural, 7s, depending on how you put the vowel points, but 7s. And I noticed there were 7 things which also lined up to the pattern. Okay, there's 5 places, and where else? And then as I started looking, I found hundreds, literally hundreds of places where I could, with the goggles of looking for the Mishkan pattern, I could see that these scriptures were laid out according to this way of thinking about the Mishkan pattern. And then I realized that that's not an accident. And so there's this little story that I made up. Say a friend walks up to you and he's got this crazy old hairdo. It's like, what? There was something in the movie or the TV show was the thing with the mockingbird, Hunger Games. And everybody had pretty outrageous hairstyles in there. That was just the style of the culture, I guess, for the elite. So say your friend walks up and has got this crazy hairdo thing going on. It's like, what's up with that? Are you like in some kind of a movie thing, or no, just slept funny on your hair after you put in hairspray or something? And whatever. And it's like, okay, well, totally random, bizarro hairstyle. And then all of a sudden you hear a noise and a cat's crawling out of the bushes and walking by. You go, hey, wait, look, the pattern, say it's a calico cat, the pattern on the cat's hide is exactly the shape of your friend's new hairdo. And it's like, what? How could that be? Wow. That's a stop. Oh, and then you look up and there's this big cumulus cloud and it's got the exact pattern that your friend's hairdo and what's on the cat. It's like, what? And then you look over and you're at this restaurant and the waitress brings out and you've got a cafe latte with whipped cream and the whipped cream on top looks exactly in the same pattern. And you're going, all right, something's going on here. Is this, some kind of is there a glitch in the matrix somehow? And why suddenly is the same pattern showing up all over the place? This is not just a random, though it looks like these things are disconnected. Somebody's in control behind the scenes. Something's happening here, and my consciousness is alerted to it. Well, that's what happened with this Mishkan pattern in 2004. And I found literally a few hundred places. And then one day in 2005, I see this pattern in the ALEF-BEIT. And I realize this Mishkan pattern is not just, hey, look, it's this weird thing, but Yahuwah put it there on purpose. Therefore, it's like his signature. And that's really significant. If you think this is the signature of the creator of the universe. So when he said he rested on the seventh day and didn't work, well, that is a type of work. It's a functional thing to do. It's an ayin sheen, hey, it's what he did. He caused it to exist. He produced it. He pushed it into existence, not working, finalizing the program on that seventh day. And if he did that in Genesis 1, well, let's say he did that before Moshe ever wrote Genesis 1. If we assume that Adam knew about that, and maybe he told Adam how he made the universe, and say Genesis 1, I'm going to guess Adam must have been aware of, and Adam told that story to everybody, handed it down to Noah, handed it down. I mean, Moses was, Abraham was what, about 500 years after the flood? And Moses is another 500 years or so. So it's about 1,000 years after the flood, something like that. So if that's the case, at least within the lineage of Abraham, let's say, the idea of Genesis 1 was kicking around. Did they know about the Sabbath day? Well, even if they did, if Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let's say, knew about the Sabbath day, and if the 12 sons of Jacob knew about the Sabbath day, it's not written down anywhere. Did they know about the festivals? That's not written down anywhere. Then they go into Egypt and they're there as slaves at least 100 years, maybe some more. It was 430 years since Abraham was told that his kin, his family would come back into the land of what was called Canaan. That was 430 years. But it seems like they must have forgotten about the Sabbath day or not held it in any regard, because they became Egyptianized. They took on the culture of Egypt because, remember, Joseph, in disguise, known as Zaphnath Paneah, the diviner, the revealer, the comprehender of mysteries, was seen as Egyptian, though he wasn't. And then when he had his family brought in and he let them live in the land of Goshen, there was a way that people did things, especially back then, where they put their own family around them control of things so that they would be protected, almost like this buffer, this shield. If you just have other people, they could turn on you. The Egyptians used to do that, especially. They had the whole family be in the government, you might say. But that's just a common sense thing to do. But if that was the case, then the people of Israel became thinking as Egyptians. And they lost track of Yahuwah's avot to the point that after Joseph died, and even though his family was still running things, all of a sudden, it's almost like Yahuwah put a bug in one of the Egyptians' mind, in his ear, to say, why are you guys being controlled by these foreigners? The guy goes, yeah, what the heck? Why are we Egyptians being governed by foreigners? Why are we slaves to foreigners in our own land? And there was a revolt, a revolution, and all the Hebrews that were, you might say, in control of stuff, suddenly the tables were turned and they became the slaves until they called out to Yahweh. And when they called out to Yahuwah, then Moshe was born. And then Moshe didn't actually come back to relieve them, and the Exodus didn't happen until Moshe was 80 years old. So you could say, well, how long were they slaves? It wasn't 430 years. Because they were in, when Joseph was alive, he was running stuff. And if his family certainly were not slaves while he was running stuff. And then after he died, enough time went by that they totally forgot about him. And then some more time went by, and that's when all of a sudden the Egyptians, because remember, the Egyptians had sold themselves to the slavery of the government because there was no food. And they said, take us as wards of the state. So you have to look back and say, well, then, if nobody was talking about or knowing about Yahuwah because they all became this Egyptian culture, then for Moshe to write about this was to bring it back to, oh yeah, hey, this is the reality. It's like, yeah, well, how do you know? So the point is, the festivals didn't exist, or at least they're not written about. The Mishkan certainly didn't exist. And so some people say, well, Moshe just invented that. He was a pretty smart guy. Moses, the lawgiver. It's like, Moshe never claimed to make this stuff up. Moshe is fact. As a matter of fact, when he goes up to Mount Sinai for 40 days, and he did that twice without sleeping or eating or drinking, right? He was up in the presence of Elohim, who was like this big fire on top of the mountain. He claims that he was told to write this stuff down. So either Moshe is a big liar and he was doing it himself, or he was told, okay, write this stuff down. And he was told how to build the Mishkan. And it was sacred. It was holy. It was, you don't mess with that. Unless he was such a scoundrel. And it's like, well, then he wouldn't have had any favor. The Red Sea shouldn't have parted. I mean, it's like, are all these mythical stories? Well, if they're not mythical stories, if the reality, so to find the chariot wheels and horse bones underneath the passageway in the Red Sea between the Sinai Peninsula and Saudi Arabia is a really big validation, which they've found. Any coral-encrusted chariot parts and skeletons. But the point is, if any of this stuff happened, there's a certain credibility, but then why should the design of the Mishkan match Genesis 1? Well, how does it match? I've never heard anybody ever say it matched. Well, I'm saying it matches. The big white fence lines up with day 1. The barbecue grill lines up with day 2. The laver lines up with day 3. The menorah with day 4. Table of showbread with day 5. Altar of incense with day 6. And the Ark of the Covenant with day 7. It's like, what does that mean? Not just that you can count 7, but thematically, there's a correlation. But if the Moedim didn't exist, and in Leviticus 23, Yahweh says, these are my Moedi, Mem, Vav, Ayin, Dalet, Yod. See, the plural would have an M, Mem suffix. doesn't have that, which means that these are his personal. So for Yahuwah's vote to say, this is my testimony of my adornment, this expresses who I am and what I'm about. There's really something to that. And could Moses be smart enough to say, I'm going to make all this stuff up, I'm going to invent these Moedim and correlate them to the 7 days of creation? Passover lines up with day 1, let there be light, separating light from darkness. And the festival of unleavened bread then lines up with separating water from water on day 2. And where water was separated from land and seeds put in the soil to grow forth plants, that lines up with Shavuot. And sun, moon, and stars in the sky lines up with day 4. Well, what was day 4? Well, that lines up with the menorah. That lines up with Yom Teruah. How does Yom Teruah line up with the sun, moon, and stars? And then day 5, the birds in the air, the fish in the sea, lining up with Yom Kippur? What does that got to do with anything? How does that line up with the table of showbread? Crazy to think that there's any correlation. Did the language of Ivrit, of Hebrew, already exist? Well, if we suppose that Hebrew was the common language before the Tower of Babel, and the Tower of Babel was after the flood, and Abraham came after the Tower of Babel, and Moshe was 500 years after Abraham, was anybody still speaking Hebrew? Not necessarily. There is one story that I think it was Abraham was taught Hebrew, learned it from Melchizedek, or some angel brought it back. So if it wasn't retained after the Tower of Babel, if at the Tower of Babel all the languages were scattered and then it was brought back to the people of Israel, if that's what happened, and Moshe learned Egyptian and other languages, did he know Hebrew? Well, his people were Hebrews. There might have been that, but how could he have correlated the Hebrew Aleph-BEIT to the 7 days of creation and the Mishkan and the Moedim? See, in my mind, I can't see that Moshe could have done that. They're too vast, separated. But to realize that they're all perfectly matched, that's the significance of the Mishkan pattern. And the significance of that, to me, is as astounding as some of these carved, let's say, cymatically designed, what they call temple in another part of the world. There's like, how do they do that? It's impossible. It's impossible. But there it is. So what does that have to do with which God do you believe in? Do you believe in the God that they built that temple in the other side of the world? But see, Yahuwah's vote claims throughout Scripture, not just in the Torah, but all through the Scripture, he claims to be the one and only Elohim. Read Isaiah, Zechariah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. And he claims that the Sabbath day, he repeatedly claims that the Sabbath day is significant and that it's his. And in both Deuteronomy and Exodus, he said, I made the Sabbath day as the sign that I'm the creator of this place. No other deity makes that claim. In fact, no other deity holds the claim of the 7 Moedim. That's why if some body of intellect says, hey, we're going to have different days, you got a different God, different identity. Because the identity of Yahuwah's Zavot, the Elohim of Israel, holds to Leviticus 23. That is his identity. If your God doesn't hold to those 7 testimonies of identity, it's a different God. Or if you reject those 7 plus, call it 8 if you count the Shabbat, those 8 moedi, testimony of identity, then Yahuwah Zavot ain't your God. Difficult words to reckon with if you are planning on going to heaven as the bride of Christ. Difficult words to reckon with if you think about it and you listen to these words and you take it to heart. You'd want to shove your fist down my throat, I would think. But I'm just reading the text. I'm just looking at what do these things say, and what do these words say, and what do these things mean? Random verse 142, your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and your Torah is truth. What does that mean? Your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness. If I looked at page number 142 here, Zadik Teka, Zadik, Leolam. Well, Zadi Dalit Kuf Tav Kaf, Zadi Dalit Kuf, Zadik Teka. Well, see, I have, the only way for me to make any sense of that is that the Kaf suffix means it belongs to you. And what's the Tav? Zadik Teka. That Tav suffix is one of those things where it's not just present tense, it's past or future. It almost doesn't make any sense. Why isn't it just Zadi Dalit Kuf Kaf, your righteousness, Zadak, Leolam? Well, Leolam means forever, but it means more than forever. It's beyond the horizon of what you can see, what you can fathom, what you can comprehend. It's beyond the scope of your reckoning. Might mean everlasting, not necessarily. But what's this Zadik? Well, that's the word righteous. But see, look at the dictionary. Zadik is not just, or Zadika is not just the concept of righteousness. It's also victory, deliverance, salvation, and justice. So you could say this word spelled Zadi Dalit Kuf is everything right, everything correct, and good, justice, victory. It's these virtues of, that's the way it ought to be. If somebody were actually controlling the universe, so that what looks like evil prevails, bad guys win, stupid overrides smart, it's like there's something wrong with it. It's just intrinsically, you know it's just wrong. Well, this is the just right. That's what Zadak, Zadi Dalit Kuf is. And we give it words. We dress it up in words that we think we understand, like righteous, victory, deliverance, salvation, justice. But the only way to really understand it is to take all those definitions and wrap it up in that. All those English words and any other words that you can find which are along the same caliber. That's what that word is. So is it an everlasting right? It's one that's beyond our scope of comprehension, well, Leolam, okay, but also it endures beyond our scope of time. So its essence is beyond our, you might say, human ability to calculate or comprehend or package even what it is. So the only way to read your righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, that's not exactly what it's saying. Those are scraps of rags that we've dressed up this most astounding statement of this preeminent, call it a caliber, call it a degree, call it a comprehension that David here is referring to Yahuwah Zavot. And the fact that he, let's use some English Christian words, omnipotent, omnipotent, omniscient, knowing everything, He's everywhere. He's eternal. He's... How much bigger can you get? That's what these words are describing. Only they're talking about not just what he does is good, but what does good mean? It's right. Victory, deliverance, justice, mercy, kindness, love. All those best things beyond our ability to fathom, calculate it, contain it, to put it here so we can step back and look at it. What he's saying is that his stuff is so Aleph that we can't compose it into a betness and stand back here and look at it and give it a comprehension. Because see, betness is to put in a form where it's packaged, where it's contained, where it's now identifiable, perceivable, understandable, as if you were other than it, so you could point to it and explain it. Aleph is so big that you can't do that. You can't get outside of it to identify it, to reference it. But see, now I'm reverting back to the letters of the alphabet to give definition as to what, because see, there's something about these letters of the alphabet which are so primordial, are so real and true and ancient and primary, that once you know these letters, I can't find anything else backing up to give. See, to know the letters is almost to be in this Aleph state where everything else is in a Bet state where you can look at everything else. And then if that's true, I could look at John 1:1 and say, in the beginning was the Word, and let's say that word is this Aleph-Bet that Elohim invented, established. If you say created, people don't like that. He invented it. He created this word, and if this word is the Hebrew Aleph-Bet, then it's with Elohim and it is Elohim. It's with and it is. What does that mean? Well, see, that's English words, with and is. And somebody was telling me that if you look at those words in Greek, it's a whole different concept. I don't happen to know what those Greek words are offhand, but he explained it to me one time. It's like, well, who knows that stuff? You got to know Greek. You got to know what those Greek words mean and fit them into John 1:1, and then you'll realize it's a whole different matter than to read it in English. People say, it is God. The word is God. And it's like, it's not exactly what it says. It's what it says in English. Goes on to say here, remember, your Torah is truth. Your Torah is truth. Well, if the Torah really is truth, if that's a true statement, if that's along the lines of Zadik Leolam, then why would somebody, if the identity of Yahuwah's Avot is to establish the seventh day as his signature of being the creator, and that all those who are of his heart, of his mind, of his ilk, of his categorization are going to observe the seventh day as his Shabbat, Sabbath, day of rest, do no work. And it's like, well, I'm his people, so I'm going to be just like him. I'm not going to do anything that's going to offend that declaration of don't do that. Okay, well, how do I do that? How do I tuck into being of his people so much that there's no question? Change it. We'll ask for forgiveness later. Really? You think there's going to be any forgiveness offered? Well, there better be. Jesus died on the cross. Am I supposed to argue against that? Your Torah is truth, then why change it? If your Torah is truth, then how can anybody say, yeah, it's done away with. Ceremonial law. Different dispensation. It would be easier to believe an enemy would lie about your Torah's truth than for me to think your Torah's truth right on the heels of the concept of Zadik, Zatka being Leolam, beyond the scope, beyond our imagination, beyond our limits of time and space, and the Torah being truth is an expression of that. Done away with. It contradicts. It cannot be. It cannot be that the Torah can fade away or be done away with or be no longer pertinent. Because truth, spelled Aleph Mem Tav, Emet, but QOOF-YOD-TET is also the word for truth. Aleph Mem Nun is to verify truth. That's the word translated faith. But what I'm saying is your Torah, there's this thing of truth, which is, you might say, the fundamental reality. No alternative. Not even there's a phrase, the shadow of turning with Aleph Mem Tav. David is saying your Torah is truth. Well, then that puts the Torah in with Zadak, Zadi Dalet Kuf, and Aleph Mem Tav, and has to do with describing the character and nature, the stuff of the one who refers to himself as Ehyeh, as Yahuwah Zavot. David is identifying the character, the nature, the identity of his Elohim, the Elohim that he is aware of, who did wonderful things for David. Remember, took out Goliath, made David king, and saved David from many enemies. And the stuff that David is writing Psalm 119 about is almost like a diary of, boy, I remember when this happened and that happened, and I was afraid of this, but you saved me, and I was looking at this, and you provided, and so the whole thing of Psalm 119 is David's contemplations, meditations, musings, rememberings, keeping a journal of his life experiences. Another one catches my eye, verse 151. Yet you are nearby, O Yahuwah, and all your commandments are true. Your commandments are true. What does that even mean? Thou shalt not steal. It's not a statement of true. See, in English, it doesn't work. It's out of sync somehow. The teeth of the gears are not meshing, and gears are grinding. All your commandments are true. Now I could read more about that and say the commandments of Yahweh Elohim truly work. If you do what they say, you will be in agreement with the vibe, the resonance, the flow of how the universe is built. I could say that, but your commandments are true. It's the same word emeth. Up there, your Torah is truth. Your commandments are true. See, in English, it doesn't work. Your commandments are truth. Your commandments are in agreement with truth. If you keep the commands, you will be right in the groove of what truth is. Well, then why change the commandment? The commandment to not work on the seventh day, the commandment to keep the Moedim forever, the commandments to, well, how many commandments is there? 613, the Jews say in the Old Testament. There's something like 1,200 or something in the New Testament. But it's like all your commandments? I thought that he did away with a bunch of the commandments because they were bad laws nobody can live by, according to Ezekiel, was it chapter 20 or something, that people talk. If all your commandments are true, then why do they say that, no, they're bad laws nobody can live by? Somebody's wrong. well, your commandments are true, then whoever's interpreting Ezekiel chapter 20 and writing books about it and preaching about it, they don't get it, do they? Either that or maybe David just didn't get it. My point is to give credibility to the Mishkan pattern is to say the true creator of the universe, the one who built this, did the 7 days in that sequence on purpose because there's a pattern of notable regard if you know what to regard. But your eyes have to be open to see it. And that same one who created the universe gave the pattern of the Mishkan to Moshe up on Mount Sinai, and it wasn't just a random pattern of some kind of encampment. It was very, very specific on purpose because it's a secret code that means something, and whether Moshe had any clue what it meant, whether Moshe ever correlated the Mishkan to the ALEF-BEIT, I don't know. Whether Paul the Apostle ever saw that, I don't know. Maybe David didn't even see it. But it's there. And whether anybody knows that the Moedim are the exact same signature as the 7 days of creation and the Mishkan, for YHUH to talk about the Beatitudes and stage them exactly like this pattern, that's not a mistake. That's not by accident. That was very specifically, but I've never heard anybody suggest that sequence of Beatitudes in Matthew 5 had anything to do with these other things. But the fact that it does means that he was subtly putting his Father's signature on what he was saying. That's incredible. And the fact that it correlates to the alphabet, and the fact that every command then of Yahuwah's Torah is written with these words, and that each word can be analyzed according to the meaning of the words and the letters. And then to realize that's what David was doing, and I can show you what he says here, means that we're on to something huge by doing this study. And without somebody realizing that there's this value in what did Yahuwah say? Who is Yahuwah? How does he relate to Yahusha? And how does it relate to the Hebrew ALEF-BEIT and the study of words? And you have to have all that. And then you have to have a heart as Gabor LaYahweh. And you have to realize that if you make his words the object of your affection because the words are as if they were him, as in John 1, they're with him, but they are him. They're not him because he's this spirit that fills everything. He's the Aleph beyond comprehension, but he gave us these words to look at and to wrap our mind and heart around. And he did that on purpose. And if you get that, then you look at these words. Then you're going to see something. That if all those other things aren't true, you're just going to read these words differently. So all these other talks that trying to set up, what does it mean to be Gabor LaYahweh? What does it mean to Sefer ALEF-TAV? What does it mean to have this object of affection, to realize that his people is the object of his affection? What does it mean? Who is Yahusha? How does he relate to Yahuwah? All these things set up, build the goggles by which we will then look at these words, which we'll get to in just a minute on the next hour.